Thank you so much, Katie, for sitting here with me today.
Sure, thanks.
I'm often used to seeing your own interviews and have been educated very much by them. So to have this dynamic now where I'm doing the interviewing is surely an honor. I'm hoping we can explore a few things together, your upbringing and Jewish background and how that might tie in to your support for Palestine, the potential you see in different forms of media in having a role to facilitate the struggle for justice in Palestine. And finally, how those of us who are not Jewish, but within the pro-Palestinian struggle for justice, may be able to show stronger solidarity with our Jewish brothers and sisters within that struggle. And I'll frame that in more context when we get to the question. So I know that you've commented before that you were raised in what might be described as a political family. I wonder if you could speak to that and perhaps how that led you towards your support for Palestine, your activism surrounding Palestine.
So yeah, I was raised in a secular Jewish family, very, I guess, politically active, leftist on both sides of my family, my mom's side and my dad's side of the family. And that definitely informed my view of the world and of Israel and Palestine as well. It was easy for me. I didn't have to kind of unlearn Zionism. I was not raised as a Zionist. I do have relatives in Israel, but I was never I never really bought into the Zionist narrative of history.
Mm-hmm. And so within your Jewish upbringing, or within, more broadly speaking, the Jewish tradition, do you feel that there's anything you acquired that has allowed you to perceive things about the struggle for Palestinian justice in a unique way that parallels with the struggle for justice of various kinds that we're seeing throughout the world?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's unique. I think it has maybe a certain flavor, or it's kind of maybe a subgenre of social justice. There is a tradition of leftist Jewish activism and organizing, and a deep history of internationalism for obvious reasons. I mean, there was not a nation, so there was an internationalist diasporic identity that often lent itself to they would never have used that word, but intersectional struggles, or struggles that were not defined or limited by borders or nations. So I think that in some ways it makes a lot of sense. I also was raised at a summer camp that I worked at and attended, that my mom and uncle and grandmother also worked at and attended, which was founded by secular socialist Jews in the 1920s. It's called Kinderland. It still exists. And there, social justice was also a very important principle. And in fact, the bunks are named after people like Harriet Tubman and Pablo Neruda and Joe Hill. And when you get care packages from your parents or your friends, you actually share them with people in your bunk.
Okay.
So they're like redistributed equally among the campers. We commemorate the Holocaust. We have something called Holocaust Commemoration Day, but we also have Hiroshima and Nagasaki Day. And even when we commemorate the Holocaust, we're very conscious of never again being not just about Jews. And we're conscious of the fact that people of various backgrounds were targeted and persecuted and killed by the Nazis.
Yes, so I feel that so much of that comes through in your podcasting, which currently at least you're quite well known for, but you also have quite a bit of experience in film. So I'm wondering whether you can comment on how you see those two particular forms of media as having potential to mobilize within the pro-Palestinian struggle for justice and other related forms of struggle.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to bring humor as much as you can to these subjects, humor and entertainment, because they can be so deadly and depressing. And of course they should be infuriating and depressing. But there's also a question of how to get people excited about fighting against these injustices. And I think that that's something that the left needs, and this something that the struggle against Zionism also needs. Mm-hmm. And there are so many cultural arms of Zionism that exist, and so many cultural projects. There's Birthright, right, which gives people free trips to Israel if they haven't been before, Jews, obviously. There's so many people in Hollywood, as we saw with the condemnation of Jonathan Glazer's speech, the director of Zone of Interest, when he won the Best Foreign Film Award at the Academy Awards, and he called out the hijacking of Jewish identity by an occupation, and he was condemned. So I think that the anti-Zionist lobby, if you will, we don't really have a lobby, but we have a movement. Mm-hmm. We don't have a lobby, but we have smart, creative, funny people. I mean, going back to the Jonathan Glazer letter, it's interesting. If you look at the Jewish creatives who signed the letter condemning Glazer, you have, like, the most well-known one is Deborah Messing. And if you look at the Jewish creatives who then signed the letter supporting Jonathan Glazer, you have, like, Joel Cohen, as in the Coen brothers, mm-hmm. The hilarious David Cross, Deborah Winger, Alana Glazer, Elliot Gould. It's just not really comparable. We have the good ones and the talented ones and the real creative ones. So yes. I think we have that on our side, and we have to make sure that we leverage it.
Yes, and to your credit, I feel so much of the humor and satire appropriately comes through in your casts, in your work. I wonder if you can speak a little bit more to how you're able to do that so well. I mean, there is, as you of course know, such a rich tradition of Jewish comedy within the U.S. and in New York. So I'm wondering, are you tapping into that or drawing from that, or where's that coming?
It's interesting. One of some of the best people on this issue, I think, have been Jon Stewart, and who's obviously Jewish, but also Colbert was really good on this. Mm-hmm. A while ago, he actually, back when Israel killed those people on the flotilla, yes. The Turkish people who were trying to break the siege, and they just rappelled onto their boat and killed them. Colbert did a pretty amazing sketch on that, actually, on the Colbert Report. This is now that has the Late Show. I don't think he has the same freedom to do things that are that disruptive or that good, honestly. But he did a great sketch on that, and he even had Michael Oren, the Israeli ambassador, on. And he even defended Helen Thomas. Mm. These are things that he was able to do partly because he was using a satirical voice. And so he was saying the opposite of what he was saying in character, right. Which I think gives you some immunity and lets you say certain things that you couldn't get away with in earnest. And then Jon Stewart has some immunity, although he's called a self-loathing Jew. I mean, as am I, but it's slightly better, I think, to be called a self-loathing Jew than to be called an anti-Semite.
Yes, I definitely want to return to that issue momentarily. And before that, I know that quite a few people, because it did receive quite a bit of publicity, the incident at the Hill in 2022. It's almost been 2 years, I believe, to the exact date. And I'm wondering, for those perhaps who don't know what happened there, whether you can just kind of give a brief description and how now, almost 2 years after the fact, you see what happened there.
Sure. So yeah, I was a weekly host for around 2 years at the Hill, at the show called Rising at the Hill. I would come on every week for 2 years, and then I was also doing some guest hosting, and I was going to be doing more of that hosting, and we were in conversations about that. We were also in conversations about a show, a kind of leftist version of The View, mm-hmm. that we did one pilot of. I did it with Brianna Joy Gray and Abby Martin and Rania Kalik. And I wrote a monologue. They call them radars at Rising, and I wrote a monologue arguing that Israel was an apartheid state, and I was defending Rashida Tlaib, who had come under fire for saying it was an apartheid state. And so I recorded the monologue, and they did something very rare, which is that they didn't release it. And I kind of went back and forth with them, trying to get them to release it, and they said they wouldn't. And then they told me I didn't need to come back in, even as a guest. Oh, wow. So basically, they banned me from the Hill, fired me from the Hill. And I did, though. The good thing is that I wrote the script that I wrote. I recorded it with Breakthrough News, so we did release the video. Mm-hmm. But that was an interesting time. I mean, I didn't actually think that they would fire me over it. I certainly didn't think they wouldn't run the monologue, because I had been on as a guest. I had said lots of critical things of Israel.
Right.
So that was surprising. It was only surprising that it happened there, because they kind of prided themselves as being a place where you could say things that you couldn't say on corporate news media. Mm-hmm. And, they got rid of me. And I have to say, Brianna Joy Gray has been doing a great job covering it. I think what happened was that they claimed that they got rid of me because of stylistic reasons, which I don't think anyone believed.
Right.
But once they said that and pretended that it wasn't because of Israel content, then they couldn't then shut down more content critical of Israel, or else they'd kind of be outing themselves as liars.
Yes. How do you see 2 years almost now, that incident compared to some of the voices now that we're hearing online on TikTok? Do you feel that has intensified?
Yes, it has. I mean, at this one show, Rising, it hasn't, because again, they had to pretend that they got rid of me for stylistic reasons, which Brianna Joy Gray, who kind of grappled with whether or not to stay there, and she wound up staying there. And I think it's good that she's there, because she uses that platform to be critical of Israel. But she didn't believe that it was a stylistic issue. She knows that it was a content issue. She has said that publicly. But so that one show, I mean, it's gotten better, but people are constantly disciplined, fired, expelled, suspended over pro-Palestine speech. People are called an anti-Semite. Right now at Columbia, you have students who were disciplined without any kind of due process. They were given like 24 hours,
yes,
and then evicted and suspended.
Right.
So it's interesting, because support for Palestine, I think, is at an all-time high. And at the same time, because of that, the suppression and backlash is also at an all-time high.
Mm-hmm. About some of the names, pro-Palestinian voices who are Jewish. I'm wondering, and I asked Max Blumenthal, who I had the honor of interviewing recently, a similar question, how those of us who may not necessarily be Jewish could be in stronger solidarity with Jewish brothers and sisters when that happens, because the Jewish person, is there a way you feel that non-Jews can be of better support in those instances?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the anti-Semitic nature of that, because one of the ironies is that, framing anti-Zionism as anti-Semitic is in itself anti-Semitism, for a couple of reasons. But one is it's based on the premise that all Jews are a monolith, which isn't true, but also that all Jews are a monolith who support Israel. And that leans into the dual loyalty trope, this idea that Jews are not loyal to the countries in which they live, but to Israel. And in fact, anti-Semites often conflate being a Jew with being a Zionist. Like, you'll hear raging anti-Semites talk about the Zionist this, the Jew that, and they're using those terms interchangeably. And it's pretty scary when you have, people like David Duke using the same language as AIPAC, Israel, the ADL. But the ADL, Israel, and AIPAC are fine with that, because they don't actually care about Jewish safety. They care about the political project that is Zionism. So they're fine actually perpetuating anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And we know that they do that because they are fine both sidesing anti-Semitism. They pretend that, violent, murderous campaigns against Jews are just the right-wing version of saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is not anti-Semitic. But again, I don't take these people seriously as opponents of anti-Semitism. Right. They are Zionists, and Zionists include a lot of anti-Semites. There are Christian Zionists who are anti-Semitic who want Jews to go back to Israel, where they'll all convert. Yes. Well, most of them will die, but some of them will have a chance to convert.
Right.
So yeah, the idea that believing in equal rights is anti-Semitic is offensive and anti-Semitic in itself. It also doesn't make Jews safe for Israel to claim to be acting in the name of Jews.
Right.
I mean, luckily they don't, so that's a lie. But it's just from a self-interest perspective. Like, I don't want the world to think that when Israel commits its crimes against humanity, they're doing that in my name.
This might tie into the next question on dialogue. The difficulty often I feel in bridging alliances with Israeli ultranationalists. There is a part of me as a human being that just wants to say, I genuinely care about you as a human being. I don't want you to be feeling constantly under attack, but you do have to realize that this is not about you, it's your state. But there just seems to be an abrupt end to discussion at that point. And so that is not the most important issue, of course, when Palestine is being ethnically cleansed, but I do find that challenging. So much of what you do, your great work in podcasting and interviewing is dialogue driven, and I'm wondering what your own take is on dialogue as or the potential that dialogue has to advance struggles for the justice that people are now seeking for Palestine or have long been seeking for Palestine, and other parallel movements. How far do you feel dialogue can go, and when might, for example, it be naive to say that all we have to do is just kind of talk about it?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends who you're talking about being in dialogue with. I think that there are some Americans who probably, when they hear Norman Finkelstein speak and hear him invoke his parents' experience in concentration camps and explain why it's because of what happened to them that he is so opposed to what is done to Palestinians. I mean, that can be very transformative.
Yes.
But it's not going to reach, I don't think, an Israeli Zionist. I don't think it'll reach a hardcore American Zionist either. I think it could reach someone who's kind of apolitical, or maybe casually Zionist. I think that probably the thing that's really reaching people the most these days is not dialogue as much as just the broadcasting of crimes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. But I think people are mostly past that possibility of solving this through dialogue.
Yes.
I don't think that, I mean, Gideon Levy talks about how there are three things that allow Israelis to live with the occupation. One is that the idea that they're the chosen people. Two is the idea that they're victims who can do no wrong. And three is the dehumanization of Palestinians. And you can't really dialogue your way out of the dehumanization of Palestinians.
Right, right. Perhaps there's like a potential to agitate through dialogue, I find, even through social media. I think that may have a mobilizing effect, but this idea that we can kind of just sit at a round table, and sort out our differences, that I think, especially at this point, seems quite naive.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were times like, Miko Peled.
Yes.
His father, Madi Peled, who was a general, like one of the highest ranking generals in Israel, he at one point was sitting down with Yasser Arafat. You know, that's different.
Right.
But in terms of just dialoguing our way out of a power game, I don't think it works.
Right.
I will say that some people can be very effective kind of ambassadors, like someone who really, I mean, I wasn't Zionist, but I wasn't as anti-Zionist as I now am. And someone who really did open my eyes to the evils of Zionism, which I never would have said before, is Miko Peled.
Yes.
I think it probably helped that he was raised by like Zionist royalty. And seeing this guy whose father was one of the highest ranking generals in Israel, whose maternal grandfather was the signatory to Israeli independence, whose niece had been killed by
Right.
a suicide bombing.
Yes.
Hearing someone like that criticize Zionism was pretty eye-opening for me.
Yes.
Not, again, it wasn't that I was Zionist or sympathetic to Zionism, but I think I was afraid of looking at quite how intrinsically problematic it was from the
Yes.
beginning.
Yes, because I suppose you're at the polar opposite. It's very difficult to confront your past on an individual level.
Yeah. And I mean, it's real. I do have cousins there, but I'm not particularly close with them. And
Yeah.
again, I wasn't raised on that. But there's so much propaganda. I mean, even the right to exist, Israel's right to exist, that sounds so benevolent.
Right.
But countries don't have the right to exist.
Yes.
Especially when you're saying the country has a right to exist that trumps the right of people to exist.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's just so sick and sordid.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much, Katie, for this very illuminating, informative discussion, and as well, of course, for you drawing on your own personal experience, lived experience. I'm wondering if there's anything that you'd like to share before we wrap up. Any final observations?
I guess just that I do feel like the values with which I was raised, and there's even this term, tikkun olam, which means repair the world. And I'm not religious, but that is something that comes from Judaism. And I do think that those values and the experience of Jews and anti-Semitism is what makes me sensitive to the oppression that other people face.
Yes.
And why would I want others to suffer? Like, as someone who comes from a people who have been persecuted
Yes.
and almost wiped out, why on earth would I identify with the oppressor? Like, why, when there's ethnic cleansing and genocide going on, would I be on the side of the genociders and ethnic cleansers?
Right. Right. Well, that's a very powerful point. So I wish you all the very best,
Thanks.
Katie, and thank you again.
Thanks so much.
Okay.